Yes, we're live. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Bold Talks TV show of virtual on the platform of Yaftimopa, and my name is Namno Brown, and for the I happen to be the lead ambassador. I happen to be the lead ambassador for the free movement of persons in Africa. Uh, I mean, of for the free movement of persons in Africa. I'm sorry about that. And this event will be about peace and security in Africa. And we have revered guests on this platform today. Just 2 days ago, we had our youth vibes, and we were talking about the role of students and scholars in the diaspora, as well as the diaspora in the discussion on the talks about free movement of persons, as well as the um, advocacy around the ratification of the protocol. So today we will be talking about peace and security in Africa. Peace and security um, as I just want to put this up so that we can see it and yeah. So we'll be talking about peace and security in Africa, and we'll be looking into the past, present, and future of peace and security in Africa. So today we have guests from the continental organizations. We have guests from APRM. I'm talking about an organ of the African Union, and we have guests from ACAS. ACAS is a regional organization, one of the RECs in Africa, and we also have guests from North Africa CSO, and who will be engaging on this topic today. I mean, this event is supported by APRM and is also supported by Move Africa Foundation. And we want to say thank you for joining us today. Wherever you're joining us from, whether you're joining us from StreamYard, or you're joining us on through Facebook, or you're joining us through LinkedIn, YouTube, or Twitter, we have these four platforms streaming simultaneously. So we want to say thank you, and we want to go straight into the matter of today, and which will be that I will first of all ask our guests to introduce themselves, and I will start from um, Dr. Matloka. So please, over to you, and then Rufina will go ahead. Will take after that, and then moderator. So please, over
Voilà.
to you, Dr. Matloka.
No, thank you very much, my dear good brother Brown. There's an echo. Is it?
Yeah, I don't know where it's coming from. So probably when we can mute ourselves.
No, thank you very much, my dear good brother Brown. And let me kindly take this opportunity to thank everybody for having availed themselves time to come and listen to us. Thank you and your organization for having organized this very important session. And most importantly, the other guests, my brother Henny and my sister Rufina. And as it's our obligation as institutions of the union to enhance our collaboration with and connectivity with African citizens. So it's a directive, it's a must. So whenever you call, we're always ready to come and talk to you about the work that we do within the union. So we are delighted, extremely happy to be with you today here in South Africa. It's at night. It's 7:30. 7:36 is almost close to midnight, but we are happy to be with the rest of the team. So my name is Batokwa Makong. I'm an advocate of the courts of law in both the Kingdom of Lesotho and the Republic of South Africa. So I've not yet obtained a PhD unless you're going to give me an honorary doctorate.
Forgive me, I think.
Yes. So I work here in the APRM Continental Secretariat currently as the acting chief of staff, office of the CEO. And previously, I was the senior liaison officer of the APRM to the AU. I was based in Addis, and previously, I'd worked at the embassy and permanent mission of the Kingdom of Lesotho to the African Union, where I had the privilege of serving in the PSC, the Peace and Security Council. And also, besides studying law, I've also had the opportunity to study peace and security studies. So I'm much more conversant with the issues that are related to peace and security. And I would like to personally share my experiences on the subject and link the subject to what we want to attain, which is borderless Africa and free movement of persons and goods on the African continent. So I'm extremely happy to be with everybody here. So to engage, get to know each other, and we share our experiences. So thank you very much. And also amongst the work that we do, the APRM has been given a mandate to contribute to early warning for conflict prevention. So it's one of the issues that, as a liaison officer, senior liaison officer, I was tasked to lead, and I'll talk more once I do my observations on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Forgive me. I think I took a lead from Hani. I think Hani or Rufina, somebody called you doctor, so I decided to take a lead on that.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think we're battling with network, and you just have to bear with us. You just have to bear with us the way it is. And so I'll hand over to Rufina now.
Yes, thank you to give me the floor. Brown, you understand me?
Yes, please go ahead.
It's good. Yes, but allow me to continue in French.
Yes, please go ahead.
If it's possible. Alors, permettez-moi d'abord de remercier et de féliciter cette initiative qui nous réunit ici ce soir pour débattre des questions de paix et sécurité en Afrique. Alors, en tant que communauté économique régionale, la CAC, je ne sais pas, je vais te définir la CAC, la communauté économique des États de l'Afrique centrale, c'est-à-dire la CER qui représente l'Afrique centrale à l'Union africaine. Je suis très ravie d'être parmi vous pour pouvoir participer à ce débat et puis vous donner aussi notre vision en tant que CER dans les relations avec l'Union africaine et les États membres dans le cadre de la paix, des questions de paix et sécurité sur le continent. Alors, à cet effet, je voudrais rapidement me présenter. Moi, je me nomme Rufina Mangemani. Donc, je suis la représentante de la CAC auprès de l'Union africaine. Et donc, voilà, on se retrouve tout à l'heure pour débattre sur ces questions. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so very much, Rufina. I mean, if you don't understand French, meet me behind cameras and I'll explain everything Rufina said, or in camera rather. Thank you so very much, Rufina. So I'll be handing over to Hani now to introduce himself. Thank you, Hani.
Actually, maybe I am the only speaker that doesn't speak French. Je parle petit peu français, but not at that much that I can understand what Rufina said. But I will ask later about the translation. My name is Hani Ibrahim. I am director of a think tank organization in Egypt called JSOR for Strategic Studies. JSOR in Arabic means bridges. So we create bridges for dialogue, for study strategically things that concern the national and the regional security in North African country. So I also have another hat that I am a member of the National Council for Human Rights, which is a national body having the mandate to protect and promote human rights in Egypt. Also, I am the North African representative for CSO committee at the African Development Bank. So I am very glad to be with you and to have such good opportunity to be engaged in a very important topic, which is I think it is one of the foundations for the African integration, the peace and security. It is very important issue concerning lives. 3 years ago, just before Corona, I was in Switzerland to have an international course for mediation for peace. And I learned a lot about how to be engaged and how to mediate among different groups in conflict in order to bring peace. And peace represent very important prerequisite for development, for progress, for prosperity. So you have the right topic right now for the our good continent, Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. So wonderful to know that, and I believe that we have the right guest to tackle this question today, because Africa is going through a phase. I mean, Agenda 2063 is what is hot on the African Union table right now. And peace and security is one of those projects that African Union has taken seriously. And the people of Africa are also very concerned about the peace of peace and security in Africa. And then we are talking about Africa integration. A lot of people feel, why are we talking about Africa integration, or why are we talking about it? Why are we thinking this topic? So, sorry, the right guest, please, to speak about this topic. So, I'd like to give each of our guests today few minutes to speak about the topic. Remember, the topic is peace and security in an integrated Africa. We're going to look into the past, the present, and the future of peace and security. So, I would want to give everyone just 5 to 10 minutes, or 5 minutes basically, because we don't have a lot of time anymore. 5 minutes to talk about, the topic, and then we can go into the conversational phase of this show. And please, for our viewers and audience, remember you have the comments in your in whatever platform you're viewing us from, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or LinkedIn. You can make a comment there, and our technical persons will guest to answer. And please remember to state who the question is for. Remember to state who the question is for, so that we will be able to ask the right person. So I would like to start with Rufina. I think we should start with Rufina at this point, to take 5 minutes to speak about the peace and security in the topic of today, and then we'll go with Hani, and then we'll go with Batloka, and then we'll go into the conversational part of the show. So thank you so very much. So Rufina, you have the floor. I think we'll just have to give a little bit. Rufina is having some internet issue. Sorry about that. She will return. We can just start with, we can go ahead with Hani. Hani, can you have your 5 minutes now? Since Rufina is having a little bit of internet issue. When she returns, she can take over when you're done. Thank you.
Dr. Brown, I don't understand. I begin?
Yes.
I understand you.
Yes, okay, no problem. So please go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Oh. Ok, d'accord. Alors, merci encore une fois de plus pour l'opportunité qui m'est donnée là de faire ce petit partage sur les relations entre l'Union africaine et les CER et les États membres dans le cadre du renforcement de la paix et de la sécurité pour une Afrique intégrée. Alors, je voudrais d'abord dire ici que l'intégration des pays et des peuples est un élément de développement très important, parce que et constitue en fait un moyen pour l'atteinte des objectifs que nous nous fixons. Alors, sans intégration, nous ne pouvons pas aller de l'avant, et sans développement, nous ne pouvons pas non plus nous en sortir. Or, le développement va avec la paix et la sécurité. Une Afrique intégrée se veut une Afrique qui est en paix et en sécurité. Alors, l'Union africaine que nous connaissons aujourd'hui, qui a eu pour ancêtre l'OUA, donc qui était la première organisation de notre continent, qui a été créée en 1963, avait justement comme une de ses objectifs les questions de sécurité en Afrique. Or, il s'avère que l'OUA, même quand elle a mis les questions de paix et sécurité comme une de ses priorités, n'a pas forcément atteint les objectifs qui lui avaient été assignés. Mais il faut quand même dire, comme le dit le docteur Baldé, que l'OUA, l'Organisation de l'Unité africaine, avait quand même atteint des résultats très, très, très précieux, très réussis en termes de la réglementation des différents frontaliers, des différents Union africaine en 2002. Alors, en termes de relations avec les CER, il faudrait ici dire que le traité d'Abuja de 1991 est l'instrument juridique justement de l'Union africaine qui reconnaît la place de pilier de l'intégration aux communautés économiques régionales. Et à cet effet, l'Union africaine, qui voudrait redynamiser, qui voudrait mettre tout ce qui est faisable pour opérationnaliser, pour mettre en œuvre cette organisation, cette communauté économique africaine qui a été créée par le traité d'Abuja, a mis les CER dans une position vraiment de choix, je vais le dire comme ça, de choix. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, nous avons vu que l'intégration africaine repose vraiment sur les piliers de l'Union africaine qui sont les CER. Et c'est dans ce cadre que l'Union africaine travaille avec les communautés économiques régionales. En termes de paix et de sécurité, l'Union africaine et les CER ont avancé énormément depuis sa création. Nous allons parler en termes dans le cadre de la prévention, de la gestion, de la résolution des conflits et même de la consolidation de la paix. L'Union africaine et les CER travaillent étroitement. Dans le cadre de l'APSA, de l'architecture africaine de paix, l'Union africaine et les CER ont des programmes conjoints. Au niveau des CER, nous avons aussi, à notre niveau, ce que nous appelons les conseils de paix et sécurité, notamment au niveau de la CAC, nous avons un conseil de paix et sécurité qui est le COPAX, qui travaille dans les questions de paix et sécurité. Et puis, nous travaillons donc avec l'Union africaine dans le cadre de faire taire les armes. D'ailleurs, je vais vous dire, je ne vais pas aller vraiment en détail, je vais aller très vite parce que c'est 5 minutes. Dans ce qui concerne, par exemple, l'initiative faire taire les armes, l'Union africaine a adopté un plan, une feuille de route, Master Roadmap, qui est notre guide un peu pour l'initiative faire taire les armes d'ici 2030. D'ici 2030, les CER et l'Union africaine et les États membres, nous travaillons tous ensemble pour faire taire les armes d'ici 2030. Alors, tout cela, tout ce que nous faisons avec l'Union africaine est basé dans le cadre de la réalisation des objectifs de l'agenda 2063. Or, l'agenda 2063 se veut la vision d'arriver à l'Afrique que nous voulons. Or, l'Afrique que nous voulons devrait donc passer par la réalisation de l'agenda 2063, par faire taire les armes d'ici 2030, par l'opérationnalisation de la ZLECAf, par la libre circulation des personnes. Parce que, comme vous savez, la ZLECAf ne pourra être totalement opérationnelle que si la libre circulation des personnes et des biens est effective sur le continent, parce que c'est un moteur qui permet cette mise en œuvre. Or, la libre circulation des personnes et des biens aussi dépend de la sécurité. C'est pour cela qu'il est important et que les initiatives de l'Union africaine, des États membres et des CER sont renforcées pour atteindre ces objectifs. Alors, au niveau de ce que nous parlons justement de la libre circulation des personnes et des biens pour l'opérationnalisation de la ZLECAf, nous voyons qu'il y a ce que nous appelons les protocoles des États membres au niveau de ce qui est des questions de frontières, des questions de sécurité transfrontalière. Nous luttons aussi pour nous luttons pour la circulation des armes légères et de petits calibres, parce que c'est des causes qui permettent, qui sont des vecteurs de conflit en Afrique, et ce sont ces vecteurs de conflit qui sapent un peu les efforts des États, des communautés économiques régionales et même de l'Union africaine pour arriver au niveau de l'Afrique que nous voulons. Donc, voilà, nous sommes les communautés économiques régionales avec l'Union africaine et les États membres. Nous travaillons dans tout ce qui est la gouvernance. Dans ce qui est la gouvernance, nous sommes membres de la plateforme africaine de gouvernance, et puis nous travaillons ensemble dans toutes les questions de politique électorale, des missions d'observation qui sont conjointes. Et puis tout ce que nous faisons rentre dans le cadre des protocoles, des accords. Et puis, actuellement, l'Union africaine entre l'Union et les CER, et qui est en vigueur maintenant, qui consolide vraiment nos relations avec l'Union pour coordonner, conjuguer les actions que nous voulons mener sur le terrain pour une intégration de notre continent et puis basée sur la paix et la sécurité. Et puis,
let's just give a few seconds. I think Rufina has network issues again. I believe we have we have French audience. I mean, Africa is made up of a lot of the francophone, the anglophone, and I mean there are other languages in Africa, and we believe that we are having diverse audiences on this platform today, and that's why Rufina will be speaking in French for the French audience and all of that. So we will wait for her a little bit for her to come back, and then she can continue, and then Hani can, follow after that. So just a little bit. I believe she'll be back soon. Yeah, you can go ahead. You're back now, Rufina.
So I don't know where I stop because I just lost the connection.
Yeah, so just start from anywhere.
Oh my God.
Just start from anywhere.
So maintenant, alors peut-être pour vous m'entendez?
Yes, I can. Yeah, we can
Vous
hear you.
m'entendez?
Yes, we can hear you.
Non, alors peut-être pour aller très vite et pour conclure rapidement, je voudrais simplement mettre en exergue les programmes que nous avons ensemble avec l'Union africaine. Pour aller très vite, nous sommes dans le cadre de la mise en œuvre de l'opérationnalisation du protocole des relations révisées entre l'Union et les CER, qui est une base juridique qui nous permet d'avancer dans les domaines de coopération d'intérêt commun pour pouvoir mener des actions sur le terrain en équipe. Et puis, dans le cadre du principe de subsidiarité et de complémentarité, l'Union africaine et les CER travaillent ensemble notamment dans le cadre de la gestion la prévention, la gestion, la résolution des conflits. Sur le terrain, nous avons des initiatives conjointes communes au niveau de l'architecture africaine de paix et de sécurité. L'ABSAN, nous avons des initiatives conjointes au niveau de l'AGA, l'architecture de gouvernance africaine. Et puis, nous avons aussi des initiatives conjointes dans le cadre de faire taire les armes. Et puis, comme je disais, la division du travail est un mécanisme qui permettra justement à chacun, que ce soit les États membres, les comités économiques régionaux ou l'Union africaine, de pouvoir mener des actions à niveau séparé. Alors, toutes ces initiatives, tout ce qui est fait sur le terrain, concourt justement à la réalisation de l'Afrique que nous voulons, c'est-à-dire une Afrique intégrée, prospère et pacifique. Ce qui fait que dans tout ce qui est prévention, gestion, résolution des conflits, des efforts sont conjointement mis en œuvre pour y arriver. Dans le cadre du principe de subsidiarité et de complémentarité, on comprend que les comités économiques régionales sont des premiers actifs sur le terrain, qui doivent mener les premières actions en cas de conflit sur le terrain, et puis cela monte au niveau de l'Union africaine. Alors, free movement. Nous savons très bien que la libre circulation est un facteur fondamental pour l'intégration de l'Afrique. Un facteur fondamental pour l'intégration de l'Afrique. Et ceci dit, sans libre circulation, l'opérationnalisation totale de la ZLECAf sera difficile. Et même, cela voudrait aussi dire que si nous n'avons pas l'intégration, l'opérationnalisation, tant pour moi, de la ZLECAf, il sera difficile de réaliser l'agenda 2063. L'agenda 2063, qui est justement l'objectif que nous poursuivons tous en ce moment pour une Afrique pacifique, intégrée et prospère. Pour une Afrique pacifique, notamment les aspirations 4 et 3 de l'agenda. C'est la raison pour laquelle, que ce soit en termes de changement anticonstitutionnel de gouvernement, que ce soit en termes de prévention, de médiation, que ce soit en termes de
think she's having network issues again. So sorry. Apologies for the network hitches. Okay. Maybe Honey, you can take over. Or let's just wait for her a little bit, just a little bit. And then she can round up when she comes on, and then I can take over. Okay, Honey, you can go ahead. Honey,
Yes.
you can go ahead.
Yes, please. Hani Ibrahim from Egypt, and I will talk about civil society organization and the role of the civil society organizations, especially in the countries of the North African countries, in the issue of peace and security and African integration. I just would like to highlight two challenges for North African countries and their integration into the African continent. First, the first challenge that most of the North African countries always look to the north, not to the south. So their direction always is the north, to be integrated in the Mediterranean region, to be connected to the European countries, and sometimes they neglect to strengthen their ties to their to the African continent. This is the first challenge. The second challenge that civil society organization in the north do the same like their countries. They always do business together, join regional network that connect the North African countries to the Mediterranean region, but few of them connect to the African networks and be integrated with their African counterparts. The national or the regional level and the local level represent the real challenge between the North and the Middle and the South African countries. At the level of integration and the level of free movement, we always call North African countries that they are Arab countries. They speak mainly the same language. The majority has the same religion, Islam. However, they have the most remarkable challenge of putting barriers to the borders. So if one Egyptian would like to travel to any of the North African countries, he has to get a visa, he has to pass a lot of barriers in order to visit such country. I will also represent another case, Egypt and Sudan. One day they were one country. Now we signed an agreement between Egypt and Sudan. We call the agreement is a Four Freedoms Agreement. One of the freedoms, one of the four freedoms is a mobility. So we should have free move between Egypt and Sudan. This is just on books, just on papers. But in reality, we have a lot of security issues and we have to get permissions in order to cross the borders. So the free move objective of the North in the North African countries always are challenged by political and social barriers, and I don't think there is economic challenges, because most of the North African countries have the same economic challenges and have the same economic factors. And I think economy can represent a good opportunity for regional integration. However, social and political factors play the main role in order to keep African countries in the north part of Africa separated and putting a lot of barriers. However, and when we come back to speak about civil society organization, what we can do in order to overcome such challenges and also create an enabling environment for African integration at the regional level and then at the continental level. I can summarize my presentation into 3 words. Civil society organization can promote. Civil society organization can promote peace, can promote understanding, can promote economic integration, can promote the right of labor and the right of migrants to move. We need civil society organization to work more on raising public awareness and raising media awareness to speak about African integration and to speak about the challenges and the ambitions of African people to be integrated and to lift up barriers in order to move and to create a better environment for a better life for everyone. Secondly, a civil society organization can advocate for the right to move, the right of the freedom of move, because policymakers, decision makers at the regional level or at the continental level will not move or take a decision to enhance integration, to believe in integration without pressure from the grassroots level to all the diplomatic missions to understand this is the desire of the people to be integrated, to have peace, to work to community development, to work to exchange experience between countries, to increase trade between African countries, and to also to consolidate when it comes to challenge international powers or the global powers to advocate our own interests. We have seen a big challenge when the Russian-Ukraine war started. We found that the prices of food increased because each country speak alone. But look, if the African countries together speak one voice and negotiate for appropriate prices when it comes to export or import food supplies. So integration is a matter of welfare and a matter of development for all African countries, and we will not be able to achieve such objective without building peace and without working together for bringing security for everyone. The third pillar is to work together to develop communities, to develop local communities, to develop regional communities, and to work together to exchange experience in the issues of development. We have a lot of issues such as food security, energy, and energy represent a real challenge for African countries. So civil society organization can work to exchange experience and to create platform for exchange views, to build or to mobilize different groups in order to advocate for reform and for peace, and also to bridge the gaps between different countries, especially in the area of peace. For example, in the North African countries, we have Libya, for example, suffer from a civil war, suffer from lack of security, and North African countries should help Libyan people in order to bring peace, so we can have a stabilized country and we can have integration between different North African countries. In Sudan, as we see, there is a peace building process right now. However, it is at the top level. Here, it is the role of civil society organization to bring peace at the grassroots level, because without having peace, especially at the grassroots level and between different tribes, we will suffer from a lot of conflict, which is not good for integration, which can hinder the development, and they can subject the safety of people to danger. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, sir. Thank you. That was amazing. We will come back. There are some issues that have been raised, and we will come back to talk about those issues. So right now, we'll leave it for our advocate, Mr. Bakloka, to have his 5 minutes. Very much.
No, thank you very much, my dear good brother. So I'll address the situation as in the past. So, I'll start with the past. So since 1960, we have had 10 civil wars, active civil wars on the continent. So we have had Sudan, the civil war in Sudan, Chad, Angola, Liberia, Nigeria, Somalia, Burundi, Rwanda, and Sierra Leone. 10 civil wars. So we have had a number of interstate conflicts on the continent since the 60s. The conflict between Nigeria and Cameroon over the Bokassi Peninsula, conflict between Algeria and Morocco over the Atlas Mountains, conflict between Eritrea and Ethiopia several times, 1962, 1979, and recently, I think, in the 2000s. So conflict between Somalia and Ethiopia, conflict between Chad and Libya, conflict between Kenya and Somalia, and conflict between Tanzania and Uganda. So we can understand the magnitude of the peace and security challenges that we have had as a continent. We come to unconstitutional changes of government or military coups. Since 1960, there are only, I think, 4 years since 1960 when we neither had a successful military coup or an attempted military coup. or an attempted unconstitutional change of government. So those years are 1988, 2007, 2016, and 2008 and 2018. So to do the breakdown in a brief summary, in 1960, we had one successful unconstitutional change of government. In 1963, 3, 1965, 4. In 1966, we had 7. In 1967, 3, 1968, 4, 1969, 4. So you can understand the magnitude. In 1971, we had 1, 1972, 2. So the list goes 1975, we had 3. Ever since the Union adopted the Algiers Declaration on Unconstitutional Changes of Government in 1999 in Algiers, during the summit in Algiers. And of course, that was then strengthened with the Lomé Declaration of 2000 and of course ACDEC a few years down the line. In 1999, we had 4 unconstitutional changes of government. In 2003, we had 3, 2005, 2, 2006, we had 2, 2009, 1. From 2009 to 2014, we had 1, and 2017, 1, 2019, 1, 2020, 1. Today, as we speak, we had 4 unconstitutional changes of government on the continent. I wanted to start with those statistics that are easily accessible to understand the magnitude of issues of peace and security on the continent. So my first observation is that the issues and challenges of peace and security on the continent arise from different sources far beyond armed conflict, as most people would want us to believe. And as my brother Hani has said, there are many challenges, and those factors, some of them are climate change, governance deficit, repressive regimes, and also the issue of energy that he has highlighted, the issue of energy, and terrorism and violent extremism, constraints related to access to land, and of course, the issue of migration. And all these issues require a comprehensive approach by all stakeholders, and not only one stakeholder. So the second observation that my own personal observation is that, out of the peacekeeping operations, the entire world, peacekeeping operations by the UN, which has a primary responsibility on the maintenance of international peace and security, half of those peacekeeping operations now on the African continent. Half of them. So this gives us the agency to address peace and security issues and the sensitivity that are related to the issues of peace and security on the continent. So the third observation is that you can never attain peace and security without also addressing the issue of development, sustainable development. So the two are intertwined, development and peace and security. Of course, you can never have development if you don't have good governance. And of course, you can never have good governance if you don't have democracy. So the fourth observation is that in all peace and security related issues or situations, the most affected are women and youth. So those are the most affected in all situations on the continent. The fifth issue that I would like to bring forward is that issues of peace and security on the continent, you can never discuss the issues of peace and security on the continent without also assessing what I would term as foreign interference in the internal affairs of the continent. So foreign interference is a reality, it is there. So most of the issues that we deal with is as a result of foreign interference. So what do we do as African Union? So once we moved from the union of governments to the union of the people, the African Union, because it's the union of the people. And if you look at the Constitutive Act that we have, it talks about the right of African citizens as a principle to participate in the affairs of the union. Yeah, so it's a cardinal principle. So it's a union of governments and also the union of the people. So we now talk about African solutions to African problems. So this African solution to African problems, it came as a philosophy that all of us have adopted. And because we want a peaceful and secure Africa, we want a united and prosperous and democratic Africa that is people's driven. So we have the peace and security architecture. So in the year 1999, we have agreed to transform our continental organization to the African Union. Then we adopted the Constitutive Act. Then we operationalized the union, I think in July 2002 in Durban. So thereafter, we established the Peace and Security Council, which is a standing decision-making organ of our union to address matters related to peace and security on the continent. So this Peace and Security Council is composed of 15 member states that are elected periodically, and some serve 3 years, some serve 2 years for purpose of continuity. So this Peace and Security Council, established by a protocol, the protocol relating to the establishment of the Peace and Security, is the one that guides the work of the Peace and Security Council. So in the past, during the OAE, we did not have this standing decision-making organ that takes decisions that are binding on member states. So we now have this protocol. So the Peace and Security Council is assisted by a number of what I would call pillars. So we've got the chairperson of the commission as one of the critical pillars. We've got the panel of the wise, that is 5 eminent Africans from the 5 regions. Then we've got the continental early warning system. Then we've got the RECs. We've got ECAS, we've got ECOWAS, the RECs and the regional mechanisms to support the efforts aimed at addressing issues of peace and security. And when the AU, in relation to RECs and regional mechanisms, it operates on 2 cardinal principles. The first principle is a principle of complementarity, and the second principle is the principle of subsidiarity. Because the RECs are closer to member states than the union, so they have to work with the union, but the union, the Peace and Security Council, has the primary responsibility in terms of the protocol. So in terms of what I had highlighted, the issues that I had highlighted about unconstitutional changes of government, we now have, as one of the sacrosanct principles of our organization, total rejection to unconstitutional changes of government on the continent, as a cardinal principle of the organization, there in the Constitutive Act that has been ratified by all AU member states. So it's total rejection of unconstitutional changes of government. So it's one of the cardinal principles that guides the union. So one of the cardinal principles that guides the union that has made the union to avoid interstate conflicts is a principle that was adopted, I think, in Cairo in 1964 on the acceptance of borders existing at the attainment of independence. Because, you know, the union, all our member states, our borders were drawn somewhere in Berlin in, is it 1884, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, but our borders were drawn in Berlin by the colonial powers, so we inherited those borders that we now have when we attained our independence. So one of the principles that is now there, it was not there. If you look at the OAU Charter, that principle was there. It was a resolution that was adopted subsequent to the establishment of the OAU in 1964 in Cairo. But it is there in the Constitutive Act as one of the principles that guide the respect for borders existing on achievement of independence. So we've got a large AU border program to assist countries in addressing issues that are related, issues that may cause conflicts, border issues that may cause conflicts. We've got within the Peace and Security Department, we've got the border program that works with member states also to ensure that there is free movement of persons in a regime that is well regulated and understood by member states. So most people talk about, and you mentioned it, my brother Brown, they talk about the principle of non-interference in internal affairs of member states. Yes, the principle of non-interference in internal affairs is still one of the principles that guide the non-interference in internal affairs. But there are exceptions to that principle. There are exceptions to that principle. So if there is unconstitutional change of government in a member state, will not say, no, it's an internal issue, like it was the case between 1963 and 1999. Will intervene to say, we don't recognize the regime that came out of what we term or what we call an unconstitutional change of government. So it's a principle of non-indifference to unconstitutional changes of government. So we've got the right not to intervene physically, but to condemn and reject the government that has come out of such a process of unconstitutional changes of government. So the other issue, people talk about the principle of non-interference, but they forget that the union has a right to intervene in a member state. It's got the right, and we are the only international organization in the entire world to intervene in a member state without the consent of the member state in grave situations, namely war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. So we've got a right as a union to intervene in those grave circumstances that I've just mentioned. So it is one of the principles that is there stated in the Constitutive Act. So this is and it's Article 4H of our Constitutive Act, and it has been invoked once, only once, by the PSC, and it has been invoked in the situation in Burundi, but by the PSC. But once the Assembly came to consider the issue, the principle was never operationalized. But at least there has been an attempt to invoke the principle and to apply it. So as a union, we have moved, and most people say the union has not done enough. We a toothless barking dog, whatever. Most analysts, that's what they say. But unfortunately, they forget the reality that the union, the African Union, was the first to intervene in Darfur where there was a situation that was claimed to have been a genocide, or at least crimes against humanity. So the Union was the first to send in troops in Darfur. So when the situation got out of hand in Somalia, the Union was the first to intervene. So in most situations, now the recent success story is the one of the situation in Ethiopia between the government and Tigray, the TPLF in Tigray. So the Union, through the panel of the wise, has successfully, and through the special envoy for the Horn of Africa, it has successfully managed to bring in the parties to the table, and they sign a ceasefire, and they work towards ensuring that there's peace and stability in the northern part of Ethiopia. So there have been efforts that have been made. The Union has special envoys in a lot of situations, including the situation in Western Sahara. So it has envoys that assist with a lot of situations, and because we don't have people that make a lot of noise for the Union, most people think the Union is not doing enough, but the Union is doing much far better than most regions. Look at the situation between Russia and Ukraine. That what is happening there we currently under the existing framework, the APSA, the Peace and Security Architecture, it cannot happen here on the African continent, because one, our architecture includes almost everybody who's here on the continent. Every member state is included in our peace and security architecture. All the 55 member states are included. But in Europe, not all member states that geographically are in Europe are part of the security architecture. Some are excluded. So it's one source of conflicts that would have in Europe. Now we have Russia and Ukraine, but tomorrow we'll have another situation there, because there's the architecture is not all inclusive. It excludes other member states that are geographically in Europe. So also as the African continent, we have adopted the Pelindaba Treaty that prohibits any member states in acquiring weapons or what I would call as nuclear warheads. So no member state of the Union is allowed in terms of the Pelindaba Treaty to acquire nuclear weapons. So the continent is free from they cannot be placed on the African continent, any nuclear weapons. So I'm saying this to state that we are doing enough, and in terms of the aspirations, because for the first time in the past, when we had this intra-state conflicts, these unconstitutional changes of government, do you know who used to take the lead front in terms of finding solutions? It used to be the special envoy of the UN, then supported by envoys from, if, say, for example, I'm from Lesotho and we are colonized by Lesotho, then the UK, we are colonized by the UK, then the UK would send a special envoy, then Commonwealth would be there. So us as Africans would just be sitting there waiting for those that come from outside of the continent to come and solve our problems. But now we do solve our problems, and we do engage with think tanks, African think tanks, African civil society to play a meaningful role in terms of conflict prevention. So that is what I had to say. So in terms of what we do as the APRM, in one minute, in terms of what we do as the APRM, we have been given a mandate to contribute to early warning for conflict prevention. And how do we do that? We do that by ensuring that the reports that emanate from our peer review exercise that have been peer reviewed and launched and adopted by member states, that they fit into the continental early warning system. We also periodically engage the PSC to brief them about the outcomes of the review exercise. Now, our panel of eminent persons our panel of the WISE is also working with the AU panel of eminent persons on preventive diplomacy efforts. We are also working with the Commission on the country structural vulnerability and resilience assessments. And we are working towards ensuring that the CSVRA becomes our early warning review within the APRM. So that's our humble submission. So we are ready to talk and engage with all the colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, sir. Thank you. We really appreciate. I mean, during these words, these speeches that we gave, questions had already started coming in, and I mean, issues are raised, and I have a couple of questions that I would want to ask. So we've gone, in terms of time. So I just want to quickly start the question immediately before I go into what the audience are already asking from Facebook, from YouTube, and people joining us on StreamYard here. You've spoken about a couple of things, and you've spoken about the principles of, in African Union as regards peace and security, and the Council of the WISE, the continental early warnings, and the regs as members of the security. I think members of the Security Council, if I'm not wrong, please kindly correct me. So, and then about the unconstitutional change of government, because looking at the integration in Africa, looking at the free movement of persons in Africa, questions about peace and security. People are afraid. People are anxious. What will happen if the protocol is ratified and it goes into force? And then we're having, and you have given so much data. I mean, so much data, regarding this. And I mean, this is a whole, book that has been written tonight. And I mean, I'm so grateful for that. So the question is, having had this history of unconstitutional change of government and civil wars, and all other conflicts that had arisen in Africa, what is the guarantee that, I know there are mechanisms put in place, there are frameworks put in place, but for the common man out there to understand, for the common man out there to, to accept, what are the guarantees that when an unconstitutional change of government happens, and with the integration in place happening, what is the guarantee that it will not affect another country, or it will not, rage into, war from one country to another and all of that? Because when we talk about integration, we're talking about us kind of having a state of Africa, the United States of Africa. It might not be, in terms of government administration, but we're talking about economically, and we know how that is. So many people will talk about the fact that during civil war, people were brought in from other countries, to fight in other civil wars and all of that. And these issues, go from one to another. So what is the guarantee? How are we looking at peace and security in this regard in post ratification of the protocol? Thank you, sir.
Is it to myself?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, to you. I'm sorry, I have to take you on immediately. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No problem. So so one of the pillars of the African peace and security architecture, like I said, is the regional mechanisms and the RECs, regional economic communities. So one of the pillars that I probably forgot to mention is Africa Standby Force and the AU Peace Fund. So because issues of peace and security, if you deploy peace support operation is a very expensive affair. So we need to walk the talk with African solutions to African problems. So if there is unconstitutional changes of government in country X, and we're talking about integration, so there's a likelihood that there will be a spillover effect on another country. So now the union is talking about strengthening the sanctions regime on unconstitutional changes of government. So we not only have, we need to have a very clear targeted sanctions on those that are perpetrators and those that support the perpetrators without probably harming the overall population that has been subjected to a military dictatorship. So the union is now, I think, the experts committee of the Peace and Security Council. They are working on strengthening the sanctions regime of the union. And once that sanctions regime has been strengthened, of course, the regional mechanisms and the regional economic communities would also have to strengthen their own sanctions regime so that there is complementarity between the two, so that those that would want to orchestrate an unconstitutional changes of government, they should know that there will be consequences. So also, I think the union, we have not made a lot of noise, but the union has expanded the mandate of the African Court of Justice and Human and People's Rights, although it's not yet operational, but they have expanded the mandate to also have a criminal chamber, have criminal jurisdiction. And amongst the crimes that the court, once it is operationalized, that it will have competence over is the crime of unconstitutional changes of government. And we hope that the regional courts would also have a criminal jurisdiction to also try those that would perpetrate unconstitutional changes of government. Because of course, you know, if there's unconstitutional changes of government in any country, the judges in those countries are the ones that administer the oath of office to those that have led unconstitutional changes of government. So obviously, those that have orchestrated a successful coup cannot be tried in their own national courts. But they have to know that at some point, they will be tried in regional courts or in the courts that in the African Court of Justice and Human and People's Rights once it is operational. So we would have a situation like we have of the ICC, where an warrant of arrest will be issued on a sitting head of state who has committed or orchestrated an unconstitutional change of government. So it's part of the sanctions regime. And the union, they're also working with the UN because, you know, us as the AU, we're in the business of recognizing governments because of the principle of total rejection to unconstitutional change of government. But the UN itself is not, there's no principle in the UN, a doctrine in the UN that mandates them to recognize governance. So, but we are saying that as far as the African continent is concerned, because this is what we have signed into, we have ratified. So they work with us in terms of condemning, but also applying a sanctions regime to those that come out of that. So I think that in itself would make sure that we don't have a spill over effect on particularly on the issue.
Awesome. Thank you so very much. Sam. I'm going to ask you another question, but I'm just going to, put the question out so you can start preparing on that while I, go to ask Hani a question. So the question I'll be coming back to you, Mr. Batloka, is you talked about total rejection of unconstitutional changes of government. We've had that, we've had like three or four last year. In 20. Have just happened. What are the?
Can you repeat your question? You didn't get I think you were cut at some stage.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay. So I'm saying you talked about total rejection of unconstitutional changes of government. We've had about 4, if I'm not mistaken, in the last 3 years or 3 between that. How is the AU rejecting that? What have they done to sanction these heads of states, these military heads of states that have taken over government unconstitutionally? But you're not to answer that right now because I need to ask the question. When I come back to you, that's the question you're going to answer. So to you, Hani sir, you spoke about North Africa always looking into the north, tilting towards the north. The CSOs in North Africa doing the same, linking to those countries in, I believe those meant Europe. Let me please kindly correct me if I'm wrong. Europe.
Yes,
Now,
yes.
how is that? What are the implications of these to our peace and security? And I mean, going by what Mr. Batloka had said, he talked about interference by foreign interference in African issues, and this could be a clear point of clear pointer to interference. We're not are looking at this, so when they have their issues, they go to the north. So how is this affecting our peace and security, and how are the CSOs, to the ones that have understood that this is wrong, how are the CSOs in North Africa speaking about it, speaking against this, rejecting this, and all of that? Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Dr. Brown, for raising this question. Let me put it clear. Looking to the north is not wrong, but it is isolate those organizations to be integrated also to their brothers and sisters organizations in the south, because we spend much of our time looking to the north. It is good to be a bridge between north and south, but when you deal with the north, don't forget your integration with the south. This is one. Secondly, we have to approach the top-down approach and the bottom-up approach. Mr. Bukluka spoke about mainly the top-down approach through the interference of the African Union and the change in the governance that should be achieved in order to bring integration, bring peace and security into the conflict zones, and also interfere in certain cases in order to calm down conflicts and bring peace to the people. And I mainly spoke about the bottom-up approach, where people, civil society organization representing local people, work together in order to consolidate and enhance a movement seeking integration, seeking peace, seeking prosperity and development. I think we need the two approach together. Some of the policy maker at the top level enforce peace. Yes, there's something wrong in the connection. Yes, I think we need to work on the two approaches parallel each other, the top-down approach, where policymakers and the leaders of African countries work together in order to enforce peoples in conflict, to bring peace and to build peace. And this will create an environment where people will advocate for more integration and more lifting up barriers between different countries. And the other approach is a bottom-up approach, where civil society organizations should be well organized, will be facilitated, building their own capacity as an institutional capacity in order to act on behalf of the people. And the civil society organization also need to be a good example. And for example, we say that governments or African countries need to have good governance system, need to have free elections, transparency, fighting corruption. As a civil society organization, we lack also good representation, we lack good governance, and we lack elections and transparency. So we have to work in order to have a good civil society movement where their voice can be heard and very strong, because they represent a good example for their people and for their governments. So when they advocate for peace, when they advocate for security, their voice will be heard because they have good representation, and also they have good governance inside their structure. So to summarize, I think we need civil society organization in North African countries, be members in African networks, and be connected to different African groups, work together for the public good, especially for the climate change issues, for climate justice, for good governance, and also for engaging more citizens in the public policy making and advocate for the good governance. It is very important right now that civil society organization in the North African countries work together with their sister organizations in South African countries.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, Hani. I just want to take you on just one more time before I go to Rufina. You mentioned challenging political and social barriers. Political and social barriers. So, is it possible to outline these political and social barriers as to the CSOs in Northern Africa? Because, I mean, I think these cases are particular to Northern Africa at this point. So, is it possible for us to identify those political and social barriers that CSOs are, facing in Northern Africa, so that if other guests have anything to say, they can, maybe chip in some things and all of that. So please, can you, outline these political and social barriers? Thank you. Hello?
No.
No,
Yes,
sorry.
no, please.
I
don't understand.
Okay, the question was for Hani. Hani, the question was for you. Can you hear me, Hani? Okay, you're muted, Annie. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, sir, sir, sir. Yes.
Okay.
You said the question for Rufina.
Oh no.
So
So I will.
could you?
Okay. So I said before I come to Rufina, so I want to. I want to come to you first. Stay on you. So I would like you talked about challenges, and then you mentioned political and social barriers. That CSOs are facing in as one of the challenges.
Brown, I don't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Now, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
you would like me to highlight the social economic barriers?
Yeah, the social, and political barriers that you talked about, the challenges
yes, okay.
you talked about. Why? Because we have someone from the African Union here and someone from the RICS who could better understand or probably give some, ideas or talk about these barriers and how they can be solved. But let them also know that this is what CSOs are facing in Northern Africa. So over to you, Hani.
Yes. Mainly, we have social economic barriers because we have overpopulated countries. We have high unemployment rates, and we have challenged right now by the food security issues. And of course, we, as you may know, between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, now there are some political tensions because of the water and because of the Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia. Egypt has fears, and Ethiopia has rights, and we need to bridge between Egypt fears and between Ethiopia rights. And unfortunately, local media unfortunately invest a lot in this issue by telling false stories on both sides. So local people are missing the truth in such issue of the water between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan. North African countries suffer from the migration issue. First, they are sending countries. They send migrants to Europe. And at the same time, they are transitional countries where African migrants take those countries, the Northern African countries, as a transition to Europe. So all these challenges put pressures on civil society organization to act fairly and to act effectively in order to respond to local migration and regional migrations. And of course, we are speaking about irregular migrations. At the same time, we have the challenge of high unemployment rate, especially, for example, Egypt has a ratio of 27% unemployment, and the ratio is very high among youth. So this creates social and economic challenges. At the same time, it put pressures on political agenda. So we create political tensions. Egypt is the same as in Tunisia, the same in Algeria, the same in Morocco. Libya is different because Libya lack of a political structure that can be assessed and can be judged. So when we look to Egypt, Sudan, Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, we can see that they have the same problems: unemployment, economic repression, inflation rate, high inflation rates. Their national currencies suffer against the US dollar, and this creates a double challenge for civil society organization to deal with the escalation of social and economic problems. At the same time, they need to be a platform for constructive dialogue, so they can bring different groups on the same table to speak about differences and solutions, and to enable citizens in all the countries to raise their voice, and at the same time to keep stability for their countries in order to prevent clashes at the political level that can create a real problem or a real challenge for security.
Okay, sir. Thank you so very much, Annie. So the question I would put, I'm gonna go now to ask Rufina a question, but the question I would like to put to you to hold to you, Hani, is: do you see this? Do you see what the challenges you've just mentioned as a barrier, or as a barrier of the Northern African countries stopping the ratification, the signing, because most countries in Northern Africa has not signed? Do you see these things as a barrier, stopping the Northern African countries from signing the protocol on the free movement of persons in Africa and subsequent ratification? Do you see these challenges as a barrier? They would say, oh, because of this, we are not signing, or because we feel this is, going to really affect, this and that. So do you see Northern Africa coming into this conversation as key players in terms of signing and the ratification? But I'll come back to you to answer that question. But I want to ask Rufina a question now. So Rufina, to you. So how are the regional organizations collaborating with AU and member states to ensure peace and security in the wake of growing insecurity in Africa? What are the REGs doing? Advocate Batloka had mentioned that the REGs and regional mechanisms are part of the security apparatus or security decision makers in Africa. So what are these REGs doing in partnership with the African Union and member states to make this happen? You can go ahead and speak in French. Thank you very much. And please, Advocate Batloka, please look at the screen. There's a question for you that you're going to answer later on. So Rufina, over to you.
Oui, Brown. Alors, effectivement, les communautés économiques régionales et l'Union africaine travaillent justement pour le renforcement de la paix et de la sécurité sur le continent. Vous savez, en tant que pilier de l'intégration régionale, les communautés économiques régionales sont les premiers acteurs sur le terrain dans le cadre des conflits au niveau des États. Vous avez remarqué effectivement au niveau de la CEDEAO, dans le cas des changements anticonstitutionnels de gouvernement, les sanctions qu'elle a pu imposer aux États et que l'Union africaine a avalé. C'est des cas comme ça. Nous avons par exemple la situation de la transition en République du Tchad, où la CAC avec l'Union africaine sont en train d'accompagner le Tchad dans le cadre de cette transition politique. Vous avez, par exemple, au niveau du conflit à l'est de la République démocratique du Congo, vous avez effectivement constaté que les chefs d'État ont décidé que la communauté des États de l'Afrique de l'Est, l'East African Community, qui est un peu le garant qui gère un peu, qui a le lead de ce dossier avec la CIRGL, justement, dans le cadre de la médiation ou de la recherche des solutions pour le conflit en RDC, à l'est de la RDC. Et puis, nous avons, par exemple, au niveau de la SADC, en ce qui concerne la situation au Mozambique. Là, nous avons la mission SAMIMB, où la SADC, justement, joue un rôle prépondérant pour la restauration, la lutte contre le terrorisme au Mozambique. Donc, les communautés économiques régionales travaillent justement avec l'Union africaine et cela s'est justement renforcé dans le cadre du protocole révisé des relations entre l'Union africaine et les CER qui a été signé, qui est entré en vigueur, autant pour moi, en 2021. Dans le cadre de ce protocole révisé, l'Union africaine et les CER essaient de collaborer, de joindre les efforts pour la réalisation des objectifs continentaux. Et comme je l'ai déjà dit, nous sommes justement des partenaires de l'APSA, de l'architecture africaine de paix et sécurité. Et puis, nous travaillons ensemble entre les communautés économiques régionales, les mécanismes régionaux, l'Union africaine, et puis nous essayons de joindre nos activités, enfin nos efforts au niveau de la réalisation des programmes conjoints que nous avons établis sur le terrain. Par exemple, nous avons le programme de l'Union européenne qui nous appuie dans l'APSA. Nous sommes justement à la phase 4, dont nous l'appelons APSA 4. Et dans l'APSA 4, nous avons un ensemble de projets conjoints dans le cadre du renforcement des capacités de nos unités au niveau des CER, dans le cadre de tout ce qui concerne les femmes, les jeunes, paix et sécurité, dans tous les processus de paix et sécurité. Et puis, je vais aussi peut-être dire que nous avons dans le cadre de l'APSA toujours, en ce qui concerne la force africaine en attente, pour justement pour conjoindre les efforts, la force africaine en attente est constituée des brigades régionales qui se situent au niveau des CER. Et donc, en cas de besoin, justement, ils sont appelés, sont mobilisés pour intervenir. Et justement, dans ce cadre, l'Union africaine vraiment travaille beaucoup parce que elle forme, il y a une série de formations des composantes plutôt de ces forces régionales, des composantes militaires, des composantes civiles et des composantes de police qui constituent les forces régionales en attente. Donc, un peu la base de la force africaine en attente. Et puis, nous travaillons ensemble avec l'Union africaine aussi, et même les États membres. Vous savez que les CER sont des organisations intergouvernementales. Elles sont créées par les États. Donc, ce sont les États qui leur donnent la force. C'est pour cela qu'elles sont intergouvernementales. Et puis, elles travaillent aussi avec les mêmes visions des États membres. Parce que le plus haut niveau de décision de structure d'une CER, c'est la conférence des chefs d'État. Et donc, c'est la conférence des chefs d'État qui un peu oriente la politique régionale. Et donc, c'est cette politique régionale que nous essayons de mettre en œuvre, évidemment, qui va dans le cadre de la politique continentale de l'Union africaine, parce que ce sont les mêmes États aussi qui sont au niveau de l'Assemblée de l'Union. Donc, en fait, c'est pour dire ici que toutes les actions que nous mettons en pratique dans les États membres, au niveau de la région continentale, c'est des efforts conjoints. C'est pour cela que l'Union africaine, et ce qui est très positif, c'est que l'Union africaine voudrait vraiment relever le niveau des CER, mettre les CER comme cela est prévu dans la communauté économique africaine qui a été créée dans le traité d'Abuja de 91. Qui les reconnaît comme piliers de l'intégration. Et l'Union africaine est en train de faire beaucoup d'efforts. Et même les CER ont fait beaucoup d'efforts maintenant pour conjuguer nos efforts dans le cadre de la paix et de la sécurité. En ce qui concerne Free Movement, comme vous avez dit, c'est vrai que le protocole sur la libre circulation, le protocole de l'Union africaine sur la libre circulation, il n'y a que 4 États qui l'ont ratifié. Jusque-là, il n'y a que 4 États qui l'ont ratifié. Cependant, dans les CER, nous constatons des libres circulations. Des libres circulations parce que nous allons dire à la CEDEAO, en ce qui concerne l'UEMOA, nous avons quand même la libre circulation à l'UEMOA. Au niveau de la CAC, nous avons une libre circulation dans la sous-organisation qui est la CEMAC. Au niveau de la SADC aussi, nous enregistrons une libre circulation. Mais joindre cet effort-là pour ratifier le protocole de l'Union sur la libre circulation, c'est ça qui pose encore problème. Mais je crois que les États, les CER, nous travaillons avec l'Union africaine pour justement sensibiliser les États pour les efforts qu'ils ont déjà faits au niveau national, au niveau des petits blocs pour l'étendre au niveau continental, afin d'obtenir les objectifs que nous cherchons. Parce que, comme je l'ai dit, la zone de libre-échange continentale ne pourra pas être totalement opérationnelle s'il n'y a pas vraiment une libre circulation des personnes, parce que c'est ça qui permet justement l'échange des marchandises et une sécurité renforcée dans le cadre des programmes frontières. L'Union africaine a un programme frontière, les CER ont des programmes frontières, et vous savez que c'est dans nos frontières que passent beaucoup de choses, je vais le dire comme ça, notamment les LPC, les armes légères et de petit calibre, qui sont une entrave à la paix. Et donc, si nous renforçons la sécurité dans nos frontières, la sécurité dans nos frontières, et puis la libre circulation qui va avec, vous voyez que nous allons opérationnaliser justement la ZLECAf sans problème, et puis nous faisons taire les armes. Si nous faisons taire les armes, toutes les régions de l'Union africaine, les CER de l'Union africaine, ont des mécanismes, ont des cadres juridiques qui vont dans le cadre de la lutte contre la circulation et la prolifération des armes légères et de petit calibre. Et toutes ces initiatives visent justement l'atteinte de l'objectif de l'initiative Faire taire les armes d'ici 2030. Donc voilà, si nous voulons réaliser, et comme c'est ce que nous faisons déjà, l'Afrique que nous voulons réaliser, opérationnaliser la ZLECAf, atteindre l'initiative Faire taire les armes d'ici 2030, réaliser l'agenda 2063. Je crois que les efforts que les CER et l'Union africaine sont en train de poser en ce moment vont nous permettre d'y arriver dans tout le secteur, que ce soit dans le cadre de la prévention, de la gestion, de la résolution des conflits, ou que ce soit dans le domaine purement du développement économique. Donc, vraiment, c'est ce que je peux dire. Il y a beaucoup de choses que nous sommes en train de faire sur le terrain pour renforcer justement la paix et la sécurité sur le continent. Nous avons les initiatives de reconstruction, développement post-conflit qui sont mis dans les États, qui sont engagés, et puis les CER qui les accompagnent avec l'Union africaine, les réformes du secteur de la sécurité qui y sont. Je ne vais pas tout étendre, mais je vais dire que vraiment les CER et l'Union africaine, nous sommes en train de travailler pour le bénéfice et pour renforcer ce qui se fait au niveau des États membres. Parce que voyez-vous aussi que les États sont souverains. Les États sont souverains, donc il y a des choses, on ne peut pas les forcer, notamment dans le cadre de la ratification du protocole de la libre circulation. Vous voyez, c'est 4 États sur 54 qui ont ratifié. On ne peut pas les forcer, ils sont souverains, mais ce qu'on fait, c'est qu'on les amène, on sensibilise, on dit voilà, il faut le faire. Donc, en bref, Dr. Brown, c'est ce que je peux dire. C'est ce que je peux dire pour dire voilà, nous travaillons avec l'Union africaine et c'est assez positif, c'est assez encourageant dans le cadre du renforcement de la consolidation de la paix sur le continent. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, Rufina. Thank you so very much. Great. I was waiting. I thought you had gone. So, we're just going to go in. We're already behind time. We didn't want to go this long, so we're just going to, in little words, shortened expressions this time. I would want you to, visit the question I had said you were going to attend to earlier. And then I would want you to also look at this question if it's something you would want to talk about, like the Moruti had asked on Facebook, so I want to post a question to Advocate Macron about what happened in Lesotho in August 2014, whether it was a coup d'etat, a coup attempt or not. So I don't know if you want to answer the question. It's really on you to do that. Then you will talk about the question about the total rejection of unconstitutional changes of government, about the last 3 years. How has the African Union responded to this? How have they rejected those governments? Because those governments are still in power till today. How are they being treated, so that to know that, oh, we are not we're not having anything to do with these governments and all of that. So over to you.
And then end with the hardest. So of course the AU, we don't only condemn a situation of unconstitutional change of government, but we also immediately impose sanctions. So the sanctions that are imposed is that a member state is prohibited from participating or in any of the union's activities. So that's the first sanction. Then the other sanctions would follow, as the PSC would consider the situation and probably invoke targeted sanctions against the leadership, because situations may differ. So, but what has the AU done? So the AU, we do not only impose sanctions, condemn, impose sanctions, then the AU sits in Addis Ababa. So the AU and the REC, the Regional Economic Community or Regional Mechanism, then they engage the country, the de facto rulers of the de facto government of the member state, to ensure that there is return to constitutional order or constitutional normalcy. So normally what the AU would do, and of course working very closely with the regional mechanism, is that they would say they give the de facto regime probably 18 months to ensure that there is return to constitutional order. So in the 18 months, we take it as a transitional period to, first of all, engage all stakeholders, political stakeholders, so that there is a new constitution, because normally they would replace the existing constitution. That's the first act they would do. So now there's regular interaction to ensure that in the 18 months, there's return to constitutional order, and the AU accompanies the member states towards elections. So normally what they would do is that one of the issues that has become a norm is that the AU would take a decision preventing those that are the de facto rulers from competing in the elections that would be organized, so that the process is free and fair, and people don't just put away the military uniform, then they come away in suits as civilians. So is one of the processes that the AU has done, and that's what they've done, and that's what the AU is doing. And in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Guinea, and also in Sudan. So also they would undertake, the PS would undertake missions to those countries. The chairperson himself, the Commissioner for Peace and Security, they would come and engage the authorities of those countries, also to work with them to ensure that the country returns to constitutional order. And also they would also deploy, in certain situations, they would also send in experts to assist the country in terms of drafting of the new constitution. Yes, so that's some of the efforts that the AU does, and all of us, the organs where necessary, if there is an issue of human rights, then the other organs that deal with that issue would come and probably assist the country in terms of setting up the proper human rights institutions so that the issues of human rights should not reoccur in the country. As the APRM in Sudan, what we did was that we did a governance gap analysis of Sudan as part of the process of assisting Sudan to return to constitutional order. So then I'll come to the most difficult question. So
I mean, you want to answer, sir, because
I will.
Okay.
Yes. So I'll come to the most difficult question. So for those that probably don't know about much, because Lesotho is my own country. So those that don't know much about the history of the country, the politics of the country. So the country has had, I was looking here, has had 4 unconstitutional changes of government. First in 1970. So 1970, it was when the democratically elected prime minister refused to accept the results of a general election. So in the middle of the announcement of the results, as it emerged that his party was losing the parliamentary elections, he suspended the constitution, then declared that he's ruling by decree. So it's one of the definitions that are there under the Lomé Declaration. So for all intents and purposes, it was unconstitutional change of government. So he ruled by decree from 1970 until he was himself removed by the military in 1986. So there was a military coup in 1986. Then another military coup within the military coup in 1991. Then a palace coup in 1994, where the king suspended the constitution and then dissolved the parliament and the government after a few people had marched to the palace after a protest by a few people. Then there was that coup that lasted for 2 weeks until SADC intervened and the government was returned to power. So there have been a lot of attempted coups in the country, 1974, 1998, and I think also in the early 2000s. And also to specifically answer the question, in 2014. So in 2014, and I will not mention the member state, but I would like you to relate the events and you answer the question that you had earlier asked about. Sometimes we have this unconstitutional change of government or attempt, then it has got a spillover effect in other member states. So in 2014, the army, they surrounded the official residence of the prime minister, then wanting to force him to resign. Then luckily he escaped to South Africa, and of course he could not resign. So they had surrounded all the key points, and the prime minister said that was a military coup. So they wanted to, for all intents and purposes, to put in the deputy prime minister that was not seeing eye to eye with the prime minister because it was in a coalition government arrangement. So for all intents and purposes, a coup in terms of what Professor Kelsen has taught, because when we studied law in Lesotho, there was a course that we used to do called Course in Revolutionary Situations. So if there's a coup, what is the responsibility of the courts of law? So Professor Kelsen, who used to be very authoritative in situations of military government on the doctrine of efficacy or the pure theory of law, he states that a coup has to be declared. And this, in our own jurisdiction in Lesotho, it has been, the issue has been considered in a number of cases in Lesotho. In a case of Moerane versus R, I think McKennedy versus His Majesty. There are a number of cases in Lesotho on that. So a coup for all intents and purposes, it has to be declared. So those that are removing a government have to come out publicly and declare that they have replaced a government and they have replaced the constitution and they are replacing the government with themselves. So if there's no such a declaration, so we cannot say there was a coup. So it has to be declared. It's a fundamental requisite that it has to be declared. Because why does it have to be declared? Because you are replacing one Grundnorm with the other Grundnorm. You are replacing one legal regime with the other legal regime. You are replacing a codified constitution with an uncodified constitution. So the degrees that the military government would issue now form the new legal regime. So when they come and say, order number 1 is that we have declared ourselves as a military council. Order number 2, we are banning all political parties. Order number 3, we are suspending or we dissolve parliament, and we shall have the right as the military council to make laws. So in that order, that forms the basis of the new constitution. And there's a fallacy amongst political scientists, a big fallacy that a constitution has to be codified, it has to be a document. No, a constitution does not necessarily have to be a document codified. A constitution can be unwritten or not codified, like the British Constitution, which is found in different laws and different conventions, and is not codified, as in don't find it in one instrument as we see it in most of our countries. So what had transpired in 2014 was that it was an attempted unconstitutional changes of government, because the military, in terms of the Lomé Declaration, the military wanted to remove a democratically elected government. So it had all the elements of an unconstitutional change of government. And even if the prime minister had fled away and they declared it, it was going to be an unconstitutional change of government. But for all intents and purposes, even in Lesotho, it has been recognized as a failed coup, and those that were involved are being charged with high treason, because they attempted to take over the state against the existing norms. So for all intents and purposes, it was a failed unconstitutional changes of government. But if I was to pick the question and say, had they been successful, if they'd forced the prime minister to resign, then they've put in the deputy prime minister, would that be an unconstitutional change of government? I would say it would meet all the elements of unconstitutional change of government as it happened in another country that I will not mention, but it will not be considered as an unconstitutional change of government, because in terms of the constitution of the country, once the prime minister is not in office, the deputy takes it. So they would have followed the prescribes of the law. So SADC and the AU could not consider such a situation as an unconstitutional change of government, because they would say, no, in terms of our own constitution, in terms of section so and so and so, the deputy prime minister has taken over. Probably he goes to parliament, parliament affirms him as the prime minister, so he's legally there. But we know that the other guy was forced to resign. They put a gun on his head. So these are issues. Brown and my good brother Isaac, these are issues that we are working on as the AU to strengthen the normative framework on unconstitutional changes of government, because these are emerging issues that were not foreseen when we did ACDEC and when we did the Lomé Declaration. The other issue, the situation of Egypt in particular. There were demonstrations in Egypt, and the people demonstrated, and of course the sovereign rights of the people So a few years later, the people demonstrated, and then the government, there was a new government. Then we said the second government that came out of the demonstration, it was unconstitutional, and sanctions were imposed on Egypt. So the issue of popular uprisings was not something that was envisaged in the Lome Declaration and also in the ACDED. So it once the AU is confronted with a situation of a popular uprising, it's very difficult because the existing framework does not clearly define what is a popular uprising and how, when, and what circumstances can a popular uprising be accepted as be accepted, and what circumstances can it be rejected as far as it brings about a change of government. But if you look at the 50th anniversary solemn declaration, it says as an exception that popular uprisings are accepted if they are against a repressive regime. So there are exceptions. So the union is now working, the PSC is now working in terms of strengthening the legal framework and also the sanctions regime, so that all these issues are addressed and we don't have double standards, where we have one situation accepted, then the other situation, same facts, more or less the same facts, but then we act differently. So those are my humble submissions.
Thank you so very much, sir. I think Moruti still has a question.
Yes, sir.
I think Moruti still has a question, and I think you've answered it towards the end. AU is doing everything to, look at, to work out frameworks and, put out those mechanisms that will guide, these issues. But I don't want you to answer this because it's going to take a lot of time. I just want you to read what he actually put out there. And so I'm going to Hani, just in few words, this is what Bridget had said, and you are representing the CSOs on this show. So this is what Bridget has said. She had wanted us to look at this topic, in the context of human rights, based approach and all of that. And I think we have, I don't know if we've done that already. I think we've done a bit of that. So, Bridget, if you're still there, please, if you have a specific question you would want to ask, we would like you to ask. So probably Hani can answer if we still have the time. But Hani, there was a question that I had put out before now for you to answer. Please don't take too long because we're already out of time. So please just go ahead and answer the question about Northern Africa. Is Northern Africa going to ratify or sign the protocol for the free movement of persons in Africa? Please go ahead, sir.
In my assessment, North African countries will take longer time to ratify the protocol. It is a short and direct answer. Why? Because I know that the political challenges and the cultural challenges. Because we couldn't, in North African countries, to have an integration between North African countries, although we have the same language and we have the same religion and we have the same economic situation, and we couldn't come up with an agreement to be integrated. So it will take longer time because there is a gap in culture, and because still North African countries need to work together in order to ties their relation to African continent. Yes, the history tells us that Egypt, for example, was one of the founders of the African Union. The history tells us that Abdel Nasser was an Egyptian leader with an African spirit. The history tells us that Egypt, in all its history, was very connected to the South. But the present situation gives us a real picture about the current status. Egypt and other African, North African countries now are determined by their political challenges that represent a real barrier for integration and for being a real African countries. So what I can call for is that North African countries only can overcome such a challenge when their community groups work together to advocate for African integration and to work together to bring policymakers on the table to understand this is a demand, not a gift. It is a demand. We need to be integrated, not only because it is a necessity for our security, but it is also a necessity for our development, our progress. And this is the conclusion of my presentation.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much. There's a lot of questions on the line that I would have loved to continue, but right now we are so much behind our scheduled time. And I want to say a very big thank you to our guests, on this show tonight. It's been amazing. It's been all shades of amazing. We've had contributions, we've had data, we have a lot of things that has been, gifted to us, the audience listening, and some things to, encourage us to continue, CSOs all over Africa, to continue the clamor for a free Africa, an integrated Africa, an Africa where an African will be able to move to any other African country, will not be afraid of, security issues, because trust me, if we want to look at the security issues or be berated by the security issues in Africa, we will lose so much of the benefits that the free movement has in store for every African. So I believe that this conversation tonight has given us that encouragement, that much encouragement as a person, as a CSO, as anyone listening, government official, to go back and poke into those decision makers, go, to those people who are responsible for signing this document, responsible for ratifying this document, to take up this responsibility and act on it. Because now we need action. We need action. We need Africa to be able to determine their problems. We want Africans to be able to assist Africans in whatever issues arises in Africa. So thank you so very much, the guests. Before we close for tonight, yes, sir, please go ahead.
Yes, my brother. Probably in 30 seconds.
Yes, sir. Please go.
On the protocol itself, I think one of the issues is that the protocol is not being ratified, and my brother Ibrahim mentioned is that it will take a very long time. It's not only for North Africa, but for most member states. They're reluctant. They've adopted the protocol, but they're reluctant to ratify it. And I think personally, it's because of a number of factors. So the first factor is the securocratic approach to migration. So most of our member states, we still view issues of migration along the lines of security. Yes. And the second issue is civil registration. Most of our member states do not have the civil registration that is at the level of, at international standards level. So you have citizens, but they're not properly registered. Even if they have IDs, those IDs that they have do not have biometric that can easily be accessed by the country that would receive them to verify that indeed this person comes from Lesotho. Then the third issue is the issue of economic disparities between our member states. So those that are doing relatively well economically, Equatorial Guinea, Egypt, South Africa, and the rest of the countries that are doing economically well, they are reluctant to accept a flood of migrants in their countries because of the burden that comes with that. That's what we have seen. But there are a number of good initiatives that are being underdone. Currently, Botswana and Namibia, they have agreed that citizens, their own citizens, crossing their own boundaries, they will no more use a passport. They would use an ID. So these are good initiatives that are being undertaken. And us as the APRM, as my last submission, we are organizing the Africa Migration Governance Conference this year, I think late in September, to address these issues in a holistic manner on why member states are not ratifying the protocol, what are the existing regimes of governance regimes related to migration on the continent, what are the best practices, so that we bring the issue of migration at the center of debate, because we have, as African continent, most people think most migrants are migrants that go to Europe or migrants that go to the Middle East. But studies have shown that 80% of the migration pattern is that migrants move across the continent. So there are migrants that go to Egypt from West Africa. There are migrants that come from East, South, East, and West Africa that come to Southern Africa. There are migrants that move from countries in Southern Africa in the millions every year. So the migrants that go to across the continent to Europe and to across the continent to the Middle East is just a tiny fraction compared to the migration that we have on the continent. So I just wanted to bring that on board, that we don't have proper civil registration in most of our countries. So you cannot even determine if I'm in Egypt and I'm there, then that if I'm from Lesotho or from any of the countries. So it becomes a very big problem. And also most of our countries, they're still viewed along the security lens, which makes it very difficult to convince a member state to sign the free movement if they look at the issue from a national security perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, sir. I had wanted to call for our last word, so I will take that as your last word for the show tonight. Yes, and I'll also mention, just to add to what you said about the Burundi ID card, and I think the other country, I've forgotten the name, that I think West Africa is also has also been using the card instead of the passport to, for migration within West Africa, and it's been working perfectly. And I think in some cases you don't even need a passport. You just need an identification, so you can have your national ID card, and it will just pass you to the next country. So I would want to call for our last words. 1 minute. Let's just give our last word. I'll start with Rufina, and then we'll end with Hani. Advocate Batloka has already given his last word, and so Rufina, over to you.
Oui, Brown, thank you very much. My slide was in English. Non, merci beaucoup pour cette initiative, comme je l'ai dit au départ. Merci au Dr Batloka, à Monsieur Hani. J'espère que je prononce très bien.
Yeah, yes,
Vraiment, pour ça a été un honneur de participer dans ce show avec vous. Et puis, comme on dit, on apprend mutuellement. Donc, merci beaucoup. Pour dernier mot, je dirais qu'il est important que l'Union africaine, les communautés économiques régionales, les CER, la société civile et toutes les parties prenantes pour l'intégration de notre continent unissent les forces pour la réalisation des objectifs que nous voulons tous, c'est-à-dire l'Afrique que nous voulons, cette Afrique prospère, intégrée et pacifique. C'est tout ce que je peux dire. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so very much. And Hani, over to you.
Thank you. I just wanted to emphasize two things. We need more meetings like this in order to exchange views and to learn from each other. Today, I learned a lot from Bataluka about the situation in Lesotho, about his work and his activism in AU. And I was inspired by his organization, and because he looked to the past and bring us to the present and give us some advice to the future. So thank you, Butaluka, for this presentation. It was very fruitful and rich in history and in analysis of the present. Rufina, thank you for your presentation, which I didn't understand, but it emphasized that how we need to learn more than one language. If we, for example, I have little French. However, every time I meet with African friends from French-speaking countries, I come back and say, you need to learn French, because language is important to break the barriers and to understand others better. So next time, I promise you, I will learn French and I can understand what you are saying. But I call for civil society organizations in all the African countries to join such effort to call for peace, security, and integration, because this is a must. It is not something for pleasure. It is a must. It is a necessity for the future, for the next generation, for overcoming the climate change challenges and energy supplies and the security. So it is a must. We need to work together. I am ending my speech by thank you, Dr. Brown, for such good discussions and show. And I am looking forward to meeting you again and being part of such effort. And I hope next time I prepare a more accurate and more professional presentation for issues that have the same concern between the North and the South, because we are one continent and we need to have one voice. And I emphasize also Bataluka message, African solutions for African challenges or African problems. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Hani. Thank you. I want to thank the audience for staying with us this long. It's been amazing. It's been a wonderful time. Yaftemupa is always having these events, virtual events, youth vibes, boat talks, and this particular edition of boat talks was supported by APRM and Move Africa Foundation, and we hope that The next edition will be supported by ECAS and and Giselle and all of that. So thank you so very much, everyone. Thank you, wonderful guests. Thank you for finding time to be here with us. Please do enjoy the rest of your night and have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.